Okay, my good friend, Rudyard Lynch, who's notorious for being what I call hist, and historian, is here to share his wit and wisdom with us. I get to share his wit and wisdom on a regular basis because we're close friends and we talk all the time. Unfortunately, some of that wit and wisdom isn't shareable in the public forum, so we'll try to maintain professional decorum. Rudyard's actually quite funny. So, as you know, I have an extraordinary, besides being my friend, I have an extraordinary amount of respect for him because I actually know the same shit, and he's like never wrong. And it's kind of annoying because you want to like feel good about yourself, like I'm smarter in some way, and then you realize this guy owns you. And so it's really pretty profound. Anyway, and he's also, how old are you, Rudyard?
22, yeah.
He's 22 years old. Okay, now I'm really fucking insulted. All right, so how many followers do you have?
500,000.
He's at 500,000 followers. And you make a living at it.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, it makes great money. All right, so I consider it a privilege and a great gift to us for him to share his presence with us. So please can I have a hand for Rudyard Lynch of Unification.
Hi, everybody. Curt flatters me completely beyond recognition, and I'm glad to be here. And this is a topic where I get the impression a significant amount of you watch What If Altist. And so this is something where, for those of you who have seen the channel, you have probably understood and heard about this before. And for those who haven't, you'll get something new. But even for those of you who have seen the channel, this is a new take. This is a new consolidation of what I think will be the big crisis of our era in history. And before I get started, I just want to thank Curt so much for putting this together and all of Curt's people. Curt's one of my best friends. We met about a year ago, and he's a wonderful person, good man, absolutely brilliant, and I just want a round of applause for Curt for building this entire world where we're all here because of Curt. And thank you so much for putting the effort of doing this when we all could have just stayed at home and played video games and watched Netflix. So without further ado, I'm going to get onto this topic. And what I'm going to be covering today is that I believe that we are in a very specific era of history. One where most people, when they look at the present world, what they see is a continuation of the last 30 years. And the last 30 years have largely been pretty peaceful. The Soviet Union fell peacefully. We have seen the rise of transnational organizations like the European Union. And most people look further than that and think the next 30 years will be an extension of the last 30 years. And this is the number one mistake people make when they predict the future, in that they have no frame of reference for what the reality of the future is, because in most cases, the future is a reaction against the past rather than a continuation of it. And I will talk about a topic that I don't think is fundamentally pleasant, but I think we all intuitively know is happening, and we have to deal with because we're the suckers who are stuck here. And as they say in Guardians of the Galaxy, why do you care? I'm one of the poor guys who has to live through this. And so I'm going to talk about the crisis that I think is going to hit our society. And it's interesting in that when most people deal with crises, then Curt talks about this with his Abrahamic apocalyptic thinking, they think of stuff like climate change, or nuclear war, or zombie apocalypse, things that destroy all of society. And I'm not going to discount that those could happen, but also, if you look at the historic record, the social structure and everything around it is broken down multiple times, and it's normal. You go over the course of history, it's far more normal to see your society, if you look at 100 years, you are more likely to have civil war, revolution, all those other things than not have them. What appears to be a short, easy thing is if you project stability and peace over 100 years, that is an aberration. That is a very implausible prediction because chaos is fundamentally the norm over the long picture of history. And before we get started as well, I thought I'd just throw this out. If you guys don't know who I am, I'm Rudyard Lynch of What If Altist. It's a channel that talks about anthropology, history, philosophy, geopolitics. I covered that entire field of life. And I've been doing it for 10 years. I'm 22. I do it professionally. My right-hand man, Merrick, manages my entire business side back there. Give him a round of applause. And I started it when I was 13 when I was bored. I had nothing else to do. And I did something called alternate history. So like, what if the South won the world wars? What if the Nazis won the Civil War? And
I got the joke. How many other people caught it?
and so I did that. And then I was stuck at home during COVID. And I'm like, I made a calculation the only way I could succeed in life was by being an entrepreneur. And I thought, COVID, I'm stuck at home. Why not work harder on this channel? And then that's when I dropped out of college after a semester because the channel was doing well enough. And now I live in Texas, and I feel really blessed because I never thought this would be my life. But if you guys like what you see here, check out What If Altist online on YouTube. There is, I think we all know that something is wrong right now. And most people know that. They just can't pick it up because it's something that intuitively does not make sense to people. People can understand apocalypses. They can understand the breakdown of things. People have a very hard time thinking systematically and thinking this is due to underlying demographic or social problems, and due to it we'll have a civil war, a revolution. And I think America is on the verge of some serious form of political violence. I can't tell you exactly what form it might take. I think a revolution is possible, a civil war is possible, warlordism is possible. However, I do think that we are on the verge of this. And one of the mental models I use is, if blank were to be the case, what would it look like? Because people often start with preconceived notions of what they want to be true, and then they refuse to take any evidence against it. And so what I say, what evidence would you need to see to believe blank? And think of it this way. If our country, and I'm going to talk about the rest of the world throughout this entire, I was going to say video, but it's this entire talk. What would you need to see in America? And you would, if you were looking at a society on the verge of collapse, you would see high political disunity, high inequality, minor revolts across the country, such as Chaz, political fanaticism, most people economically struggling, and people just seem to be on the breaking point. You look in your waitress's eyes, and she seems stressed. You go to school, everyone seems like they're stressed. Just people seem to be on the breaking point. And it's almost like you can feel it in the air. There's just this feeling of underlying desperation wherever you go. And the problem is, this perfectly describes our current society, and everything that would be the case if we were to be on the verge of a civil war revolution is the case. And so the problem here, and the thing is, over the course of this, I will go through the historic parallels of similar periods. These happen very constantly over the course of history. And the thing is, no one predicts them. This is an image of France before the French Revolution, and this is an image of Russia before the Russian Revolution. These both look like humane, civilized societies where people are walking around, wearing good clothing. These look nicer than our cities. Like, keep it real. Go to San Francisco, go to New York. Our cities are not as nice as this. And the thing is, everyone at the time thought that these societies would survive forever and that everything would be safe. And that's what people make themselves believe. And in most cases, once the society breaks down, a reason for it is that the ruling class is incapable of realizing how bad things can get. Due to that, they don't make the necessary precautions. And so, I probably don't have to do this bit because we're all Curt's people here, but for most of the general public, if you tell them we could have a civil war or revolution, they just won't believe it because they think we're in a civilized era. But the problem is, every era thinks themselves to be civilized. And the thing that I say is that a person who cannot remember the past and a person who cannot learn from experience is insane. In a healthy society, they'd be in a mental ward. Now they'd be on the streets. But in history and today, if you want to forget the past, that is what progressives think is the sanest and best policy. And so we don't have any historical parallel or historical tradition. Things could get pretty bad now. And so I've been studying this topic for a couple years, and what I've found is that there are very discernible historic crises that occur with pretty regular frequency over history. And this entails the collapse of major governments, famine, plague, war, or the Four Horsemen. And they happen roughly every 2 centuries with pretty regular frequency. And the last couple examples, and I'm going to go through more of these, there was one in the 19th century. In the Western world, it was the French Revolution. In China, it was the Taiping Rebellion, that stuff. 70 million people died in the famine of 1876, which is more than World War II. 200 years before that were the wars of religion, and that was across the whole world. Like there was a bloody civil war in China at that point. Before that was the Black Death. Before that, I made this chart a couple years ago. There was the Crusades in 1100, the collapse of the Franks in 800, plague of Justinian. You can go back as long as we have records. Roughly every 200 years has been a breakdown of the major social order. And the thing is, why would we be different? And you could say the Industrial Revolution, but I'm going to take that claim apart as we go further on. And the book that got me on this whole trajectory was The Great Wave by David Hackett Fisher. This is one of the books that I recommend you all read. It's a pretty good read. It's like 200 pages. And he goes through all of these historical crises. And the interesting thing is that there are very normal and very standard things to look for to predict these crises as they happen over history. And as I said before, in the Western world, these are the three ones we have the best records for. Because as you study history, as a general rule, everything from 1000 AD in Europe is very well recorded. You know the price of wine in every city in Europe, basically. Once you get further back, it's harder to measure this stuff. And so, from David Hackett Fisher, because there's been a whole slew of historians who have done this and tried to figure these out, from David Hackett Fisher came Peter Turchin. And with Peter Turchin, he's a data scientist, and what his stuff, I think, is one of the most revolutionary in the history discipline, where he runs computer models, and through these computer models, he can predict when societies fall apart. And it's actually pretty easy to model, and he's done this off 3 variables, and these variables work over time, where the way it works is that with these 3 variables, he's plugged them in retroactively to a bunch of historic crises, such as the fall of the Roman Republic, the fall of the Roman Empire, the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, the Black Death in Europe, the English Civil War, etc. And the thing is, through these 3 variables, his computer models predict the actual years these crises took place in. And he did this for America in 2010. And his computer model 15 years ago said that America was due for a crisis on the scale of the previous ones I've mentioned here in the 2020s. And the problem is that everything in our real lives has validated that. If you were to think at the time, what would happen to America to set it up for a revolution over the next 10 years, I cannot think of a better example of what we've had to live through. And I'll explain how these 3 variables work. But the 3 variables that drive this political polarization, number 1, income inequality. A very small amount of very wealthy people run most of income when most people are in poverty. Number 2, wage stagnation. Normal people's incomes aren't going up. Number 3, elite aspirants, or lots of people who want to have good jobs, but who cannot. And the system is basically doesn't allow them due to the high amounts of inequality. And these may look different, but fundamentally they're driven by the same factors and have the same end result. And let me explain how this occurs over time. The first step of which is that you have a period of peace, and the world operates through natural biological feedback loops. And the way that works is that everything must come to an end. And so through the seeds of every system comes the breakdown of the next system. And as Aristotle said, there are 3 political systems, and the furthest extension of each political system ends up being their destruction. And so the peace and stability sets up the preconditions for the collapse of the peace and the stability. So you have a period of great wealth and productivity, and for us that was the 1950s, the post-war period, which was the best period to be alive for a normal person in world history by a bunch of metrics, whether community, people getting married and having children, personal income, inequality, disease. And the thing is, the 50s were so good that it in fact created incentives against cooperation. Because what happens when you have a period of stability? The population grows because people want to have kids, but also people want to bring more people into the system to share into it. And so in our society, we have literally done everything we could do to depreciate wages. Immigration, globalization. Immigration add 40 million people to the labor pool. Globalization pulls on several billion people in China or Latin America or the rest of the world. Deindustrialization hurt some parts of the country, including mine, really difficultly. And it hurt the middle class as well, as it replaced the predominantly middle class manufacturing jobs. Women entering the workforce grew it by, I guess, around a third. And automation also automation is one of the biggest, actually, though people don't talk about it, where all of these factors depreciated wages by a significant margin. And what in fact happened is that the demands on labor grew 40% higher than the output and need for labor. And so you ended up with a system where normal people's wages have stagnated. And the thing is, let's keep it totally real. Think of Homer Simpson, and most of the people here are older than I am. And because of that, you know this happened. You lived through this process. You grew up in a world where a single man could work a normal job and support a wife and kids. And now, even for upper middle class people, two parents often cannot support children. And think of Homer Simpson, where the whole point of the show is he was a lower middle class loser, but he owned his own house, had 3 kids, he had a stay-at-home wife, and he took multiple vacations a year. And Homer, that life is completely unattainable. And so just look back across your life. And Peter Turchin has done a multivariant picture of this across family, health, employment, etc. And it showed this really stark decline that occurred after the post-war period in all quality of life. And I mean, it goes across so many variables because we in the modern world tend to over-prioritize material wealth over everything else. Where we found across social science studies the things that, of course, being in poverty makes people stressed. No surprises there. But once you move out of direct poverty to middle or upper class, the gains are kind of marginal, especially over long periods of time. But things like religion, community, and more, they provide mitigating factors against really harsh economic conditions. And so like I've been to Egypt and a lot of people go to Guatemala and stuff. You see third world countries, people are poor, but they're happy because they have these other mitigating factors. And the thing is, for revolutions in history, people will often rebel when they're starving, when they're pushed into poverty. But we don't have to be starving because we have removed other mitigating factors those societies have. So the line you have to cross for society to fall apart is much higher. People don't have to be starving anymore to have a revolution because we're having a mental health crisis where people are psychologically very unstable and we lack any sense of mindfulness in our society. As an example, religion is supposed to say, if you support and love God, that will provide some modicum of social stability in your life. Once you remove that, it creates large amounts of anxiety once you remove mindfulness. And just as a summary, and people are often too prideful to talk about what life is like, but most people's lives are terrible now. Most people you walk across the street, do business with, they have very hard lives. And we can't talk about this, but your normal American with less than $1,000 in the bank is overweight, lonely, anxious, and for young people, childless. We are the first time in history where the average person age 30 is childless. And I'm sure, as you all know, humans are biological animals. We are driven by evolution. If we can't breed, everything else falls apart. People are designed to breed first and be rational later. So once you remove the incentive for reproduction, you end up in a situation where the public has no incentive to keep going because the system's not getting them what they biologically need. And I mean, I've said this before in many other videos, but I think the dating crisis is the #1 driver of revolution, even beyond economics, where I see a touched a chord there. 2/3 of young men under 30 are single. A third of men under 30 are virgins. And the thing is, it's a dating and marriage crisis where there's a 50% shot if a man gets married, his wife leaves him and takes everything he has for him having done nothing wrong. And so this removes biological incentives towards cooperation inside society, because society is a bunch of crazy monkeys who follow people in tall hats. And we all agree on some shared rules so that we can just not kill each other. But once the monkeys can no longer breed, they don't have to work together anymore. And that's kind of where we're at now, where we're in a society where we've removed incentives towards cooperation, so why cooperate? And one of the things I think about is I'm right-leaning. Most of my target people I talk to in my audience are young, earnest men, right-leaning men. They're the people who own guns, work hard, and would be the best kinds of people to fight in a war, but we're at the point where they are not bought into the system enough, where they don't want to wage a war. And if that demographic isn't willing to fight for their country, it means you have completely alienated the population and you've removed any sense of loyalty. Societies that are operating well have lots of incentives for cooperation. 1950s America, your society basically promised you mating opportunities, a certain degree of wealth. The ruling class had the interests of the dominant ethnic and religious groups in mind for the society, which means that it was appeasing the majority of the population. The government was responsive to the public, but now we're in a situation where, due to very high inequality, because what happens when labor is undervalued or labor is pushed down is the amount of power money has over labor grows up exponentially. So if you're paying the average person less wages and management makes more money, magnify that across the entire population of the country, it becomes exponential. So inequality rises very rapidly. And once inequality is really high, it means that there are very few good jobs. And what ends up happening is that once there are very few good jobs and everyone else is screwed, there's no reason to play the rules fairly. And what ends up happening is that the top positions often end up being given out in corrupt manners or self-serving manners because people don't care about justice, they care about them surviving. And so society splits into different factions where in our society, the left versus right divide is college educated versus non-college educated. Look at the left's policies. They prefer social workers over the police because you could make an argument policemen are as magnanimous and self-serving, or much more so than social workers. Social workers have college degrees, policemen don't. They prefer diplomacy over the military. Diplomats have college degrees. Army men don't. They prefer college-educated professors to determine morality over priests because the college-educated professors have college degrees. I mean, of course. But so look at the right and the left. Immigration also. Immigration benefits the college-educated because it lowers the wages of working people while immigrants very rarely compete with the college-educated. And all of the left's policies benefit the college-educated. All of the right's benefit the non-college-educated, which is stuff like lowering taxes for businessmen, giving religious authorities more power, giving the police and the military more power, etc. And what this all means is that once there's only a couple of good slots, people don't care at the society, they care at their group's survival. And what this translates to is that there's no incentive to cooperate, and there's incentive so that your group can survive. And so this society bifurcates among political, sectarian, many different lines. And this is just a summary of the whole thing so you guys don't forget. Number one, there's an era of peace. The era of peace results in the growth of the labor pool in one form or another. This then results in a disbalancing labor and capital. Capital gets more powerful. And then what happens is that once this logic reaches its fundamental point, because it's found from computer models, the natural state of the world is for inequality to grow. Nothing else added. What will happen is that the wealthy accrue more and the poor accrue less. And that's what the natural process of the world is. When it pushes too far, you have revolutions, you have wars, because most people have no incentive to work inside the system, and people are struggling for the handful of good positions that are left. And what occurs at this point is that there is a very large social class of people who would like to get into positions of authority but cannot because there's just not enough of them. And as the system continues to compound, those who dole out said positions, they become corrupt. And you see this with today, where for top corporations and for hiring in companies and in universities, it's done by identity, racial or ethnic or sexual lines, which is a way the left has co-opted the system to put their people in good positions by the metrics they decide, rather than the pre-existing system, which was attempting to be meritocratic. And once one side of the political spectrum gets social capture, it removes the incentive for the other side to cooperate with them. And so society becomes more corrupt, it becomes more silly, more angry. And as of now, I believe we are on the verge of a civil war. And I hope I've outlined all the reasons I've believed that so far. But let's just look at the last couple years. Look at the entirety of the Trump presidency. The fact in all the emotion and all the vitriol that created. Look at how Trump is currently, he's being tried. One of the first presidents that happened to American history. Look at Chaz. Look at the various issues that occurred with the Capitol. Look at how major cities aren't safe. Look at how you go on Twitter, and people openly talk about wanting to kill people on Twitter. Whenever I pull up Twitter, it's just incredibly aggressive. People openly talk about wanting to kill people. And the thing is, that is exactly what you would expect for society on the verge of a civil war. So, there are multiple... God, it's good talking here because I won't have to justify this statement too much. Because I was planning a 10-minute I was trying to take 10 minutes to explain my belief that the left runs society. I don't think I have to do that here. Okay. So, although the left may LARP as being rebels against the empire, they are in fact the empire. And this is one of their most useful intellectual tools. But the left runs academia, the media, the government, bureaucracy, Hollywood, military contractors, and most large corporations. And they have unanimous control over all the institutions of society. And to think of this, nothing the left has done has been controversial. The left can do the most obscene things possible. There will not be outcry in society against it. There will be a couple people on the right. The Babylon Bee will get angry. Curt will get angry. The Missouri Synod will get angry. But the left can do whatever they want. And that demonstrates they are part of the ruling class and they run society. And what this effectively also does is it makes the left very weak because they are what the ruling classes were, or the French or the Russian revolutions. They have no concept on how precarious their power is because they don't have to try. And so the left has become very complacent. And this always shocks me because this was obvious to me since I was a teenager. But the left is incredibly weak. They lack any ability to have physical force, and they don't even have a concept that physical force could be an issue. And that's something that shocks in American politics, because if you read enough history, there's so much blood, and it's depressing and really sad to read how common war is in history. But no one on the left has a concept that physical violence could happen. And if they do have it, they don't take it seriously. Chaz didn't have any weapons, and it ran out of food within 12 hours. And the left has no military power. Most enlisted men in the military are left-leaning. Most enlisted men in the military are right-leaning, so are their officers. The top brass of the military has been political appointments by the left, which was the case for the Russian and the French revolutions. But what occurred in both, actually, was that the enlisted men sided with their colonels and with their lieutenants rather than their generals because they felt more of a sense that their low-level officers were people like them who they respected. Then there is no reason to be on the left as a young man. The left hates you if you're a young man. There's no reason to die for it. They have purposely spurned the police. Their geographic region is a bunch of coastal city-states. The problem here, look at the left. The right has a single geographic region. They can put the capital in Austin, Kansas City, Omaha, and they have a whole continent-spanning region. It's all the resources, all of the terrain, all the food. Even look at the East Coast, one of the biggest concentrations. The right could cut off New England from New York. They could cut off Washington, D.C. from Philadelphia. And all of these city-states, the left doesn't even have the sympathies of the countrysides between the cities. These cities can't feed themselves. They don't have any weapons. Cities in America don't make manufacturing as the countryside. And so we're at the point where the left has literally no cards they can play with actual physical force. And the left also, their culture, it dislikes hierarchy, discipline, masculinity, standards, organization, owning weapons, force, aggression. The left is it is perfectly designed. If I was a right-wing figure and I wanted to design the left to be weak, I would have made it exactly as they are. And so the left also thinks owning weapons is morally wrong, which is, they want the government to have the weapons, but they think they shouldn't own weapons. And the problem here is, and this is one of the disjoints I see here, is that the left behaves in this arrogant manner where they think we're going to run all of society and we're going to completely change the society and break it, but they've completely neglected physical force. And this is obvious to me. I'm thinking, how did you guys overlook this? And the fundamental reality is I just don't think they're on this wavelength. And the problem here is that this sets up the incentive for revolution, because if you have a small, wealthy, entrenched elite that has no physical force, no connection to the people, like, it doesn't add up. So the thing with the rebel coalition here is that the only thing it needs is to be in opposition to the main society. And the thing is, the left, what it selects for is docility, it selects for feminization and social climbing. If you are part of the mainstream left, those are the three things it selects for. The right is the opposite. It selects for aggression and masculinity, which, when you put those together, it's sociopathy. And so I see this rightist coalition develop, and it's got a wide variety of people across the political spectrum, including fascists, libertarians, Nazis, conservatives, red pillars, Petersonians. All my red pillars in the house go, yay! Don't do that, actually. I got to do the club work here. Curt gave me some drinks, got to get the club going. So the rightist coalition is incredibly diverse, and it actively selects for sociopaths. And this is something I try to be careful of as a young man as part of this movement, that I see these historic trends playing out, but I don't really want to live in this I don't want to live through a revolution.
We don't either.
Yeah, and so it's unpleasant, and history is yet to be written. And I'll just throw in my briefly one-sentence argument of the future is yet to be determined, and so let's not go too hard. But the thing with the rightist coalition is, because the left has no physical force, it doesn't have a way to hold itself against the right. And so you've developed this coalition that's incredibly aggressive, incredibly strong, that could wipe out the left pretty easily. And you've created the incentive for revolution massively here.
So you're saying they've opened, because of their very interest, bias, and nature, they've created themselves as weak, and they've created the incentive for the stronger.
Correct. What I said before is the thing I dislike the most about the Obama administration is that Obama made sure Trump could happen. Obama set up a country that wanted Trump, and that's my biggest criticism of the Obama administration. The thing is that I've set up all these variables, and fundamentally, I don't know what's going to happen. It could be a revolution, it could be a civil war, it could be a foreign war. Imagine there's gunpowder that lies all around the floor, and someone could light a match any part of that gunpowder, but then it's going to spread immediately. The problem is, there's a lot of matches, and I don't know which are going to get lit. And so, from the previous secular cycles, there's a couple things we could look for. Budget issues are the number one problem, with the French Revolution being the easiest example. And I relate national issues to marital issues, because human relations across the entire chain mimic each other. Where what are the number one things that make sure couples divorce each other? One of which is, number one's money. Couples break up over money issues, just like us. And the thing is, we keep on trying to pass budget amendments every 30, 40 days, and they only barely pass. I think we got to pass one next week. And let's say each budget amendment, 15% chance it fails. You do that 10 times, you're getting over 100% odds. And so if we can't fix the budget, and it would take a amount of political will and brilliance we don't have to fix the budget, it's going to burn over at some point. The next thing's foreign wars. Imagine you're in a marriage. The mother's mother gets a horrible illness. The family has to support it. The husband doesn't like the mother's mother. They divorce. It's similar to foreign wars for us. Extra funding for Ukraine, the right wouldn't like that. Or getting into a war over Ukraine. Israel divides both sides of the political spectrum. And so a foreign war, in the case of many other historic periods like the 100 Years' War, the Russian Civil War, could start this political crisis as one side says we don't want to get involved in this foreign war, which will further put us into debt. And of course, presidential election, which I think we all know, where I personally do not believe we will make it past this election without some serious issues. And I mean, both political sides disputed the last two elections. And I mean, the thing is, once one side knows the other side will dispute the results no matter what happens, you have removed the incentive to be honest. If you think the Democrats or the Republicans will criticize you for not being fair with the election, why would you be fair? And so we've created a series of horrible incentives here where I personally do not see us getting out of the next election without some kind of serious violence. And so that basically gives us a year. So you look over the historic period, and then these secular cycles have really similar patterns across them because they're driven by fundamental demographic issues. And over a period, cycles normally take 60 years to work through once the instigating incidents occurred. And so, for example, The crisis of the 17th century started in the 1620s and ended in the 1680s. The crisis of the 1300s started out in the 1340s and ended in the early 1400s. And the thing is, that does not mean the rest of our lives will be terrible. Because if you look over those 60-year periods, what's often the case is that there are short, bloody periods that are bad, then in between it are decades of peace. And the thing is that, or decades of peace with low-level wars, where the wars are so minor that you can just continue your life, which is something we can't conceive of because, I guess we can conceive of it, but we've had the wars in the Middle East that are like that. But most people's conceptions of war are total war, like the world wars. And so we have a profound similarity with these previous historic crises, that we are facing intractable demographic issues, but they're the exact opposite. Where in most of these historic crises, the problem is that the population's gotten too high. And now you could say the population's too high. We could support more people, but our labor pool's too big. But also, aging. And the thing is that aging is eating our societies alive. And America's doing pretty well, actually. I mean, look at the oldest countries. America's one of the youngest countries in the industrialized world. We're younger than China now. We're younger than Russia. And the countries that are really going to get fucked by aging, and I'm sure a lot of you follow Peter Zeihan, and I respect him profoundly, China, Germany, Japan, Russia, these countries are going to age very rapidly now. And the problem is that with the exception of Japan and Germany, or China and Russia are not wealthy enough to be able to support the amount of aging they have, because they're not wealthy first world countries. They don't have a welfare state. And so they are forced into aggressive positions. Is also, keep in mind, these are autocracies. And so one of the great sad things of history is in many cases there's a stronger incentive for a ruling class to start a war to preserve their society. Because the thing is, if they don't start the war, they lose anyway. If they do start the war, there's a 50% shot their regime survives at the expense of young men they don't know. And this is something you've seen 30 times, probably many more over history. And so I worry about having an external war. And so there are multiple crises with these secular cycles that go on at the same time. And I don't want you all to get overwhelmed right now, because we have to live through this. There's some drinks in the back. But the problem is that the problems I discuss in America are things across the entire world. The factors I talk about here, such as income inequality, aging, political polarization, they're happening in China, Russia, the European Union, Brazil. This is why you look at every country in the world, a lot of similar factors. The last election in Brazil, very similar to the one in America. Russia, China, their elites are making scary decisions because they feel unstable. And this is something that's occurred over history, where you look at these secular cycles, all of Eurasia hit their 14th century problems at the exact same time. In the mid-17th century, almost every single civilized country in the world was having a civil war and an international war at the same time. Because societies have an incentive past a certain point to start external wars while their internal wars are going on. And the way this works is that it's not a total war, it's a very limited war. And societies, as we've seen with fighting wars in the Middle East for 20 years, they can wage multiple limited wars while maintaining their economy. And this is one of the worst books I've read. It is legitimately unreadable. And you should be thankful that I read this book and summarized it for you, so you will never have to read it. But
So true.
But I feel like you're the only person who can understand that book, Curt. So the thing with this book is this guy did this interesting thing in the 70s where he did statistical models. He's like Turchin before, like Turchin who speaks a foreign language. But so he did these statistical models and he found countries tend to have major wars every century. And this is a different cycle from the secular cycle. The thing with secular cycles is that's social instability, where, for example, the world's wars happen for the exact opposite reasons. The 100 Years' War happened because England and France were falling apart as countries, same as the 30 Years' War. The world's wars happened because every country in the world was doing so well. They had a lot of energy, and they needed to be able to just put out and like constantly conquer other countries. And so the world's wars were wars of success. These societies were so strong that they started butting up against each other. But what he found is that every century, in the early part of the century, is a major war. The last obvious example being the World Wars. Before that was the Napoleonic and French Wars. Before that was the 30 Years' War, and then the Italian Wars. And these are all nasty wars, and I don't fully understand the logic of this book. It's caused by something to do with imperial outlays. So, for example, the U.S. has put so much effort into our military-industrial complex that basically our incentive is to wage the war to preserve our imperial dominance. And
Exactly. Can I make one comment?
Yeah, please.
Isn't there the incentive also, is if you take all those men out of the population and get control over them in the military?
I've thought that. Yeah, I mean, for example, the government must know young men hate them, and so I can imagine they want to kill off the young men by sending them to war. And but the problem.
These people busy.
I mean, yeah. To jump off Curt's point, a problem here, and this is a problem you see with these previous conflicts, is if any major government arms its young men, they are providing leadership, weapons, and training to a future generation of revolutionaries. No one, I'm surprised the government hasn't thought of that. Because, for example, if the Chinese invade Taiwan, and I don't have time to get into this, but almost every country has issues comparable or worse than America. If you ranked China, Russia, India, Europe's issues compared to America, I firmly believe America is still one of the best off countries in the world. And if you want to be safe, America is still one of the safest countries in the world, even with the issues we talk about. And I've made hour-long videos at each of these countries, so I don't have time to get into that. But the thing with China invades Taiwan, they have armed a group of young men who can then turn those guns onto China. Because China got 51% youth unemployment, remember. And we tend to not view the world in these terms, but the world is a giant geopolitical alliance structure. And we tend to see these countries as independent places, but the reality is they're part of giant transnational alliances, where blue is America's allies. And it's funny that Americans don't know who our allies are, but these countries could determine world wars that we get involved in. So America has this alliance, hugs Eurasia, and the former Mongol Empire is this bloc that supports China. And basically, a series of wars could start on this edge that causes a bigger war. And I don't know if this will happen. I genuinely don't. We could have a major war. We might not. It could be, I don't think it'll be a total war because the countries today don't have the capability to wage total wars. No one has enough young men or manufacturing for that. I'd see them as being limited wars fought with mercenaries and to wipe out the other country's economy and ability to function, which is how the previous wars in these cycles, such as the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, were fought. What we're seeing here is that there is all attention built up for a war, but the question is, do Russia or China or America fall apart first before they can wage an external war? And the order here is really exciting. And this is going to be my next video.
Did you just say what I think? The order here is really exciting?
We have to live through this crap. I got to find a silver lining. I got to find a silver lining here somehow. So, will China have a civil war before America? Will we have an external war before another country has a civil war? And so the order here determines the fundamental issues. Where there's a lot of dynamite everywhere, the question is what stick gets blown up first? And then what stick does that blow up? And that determines great questions, but we don't know. And my job is my literal job is betting against God. And this is my catchphrase. The world is a chaotic place. There are infinity ways to be wrong and only a handful to be right. Thus, the statistical chances of me being correct in any situation is pretty low. And so, my job is betting against God, and that the world, or God, is constantly giving me new crap that I have to... And my predictions change every year, because I cannot perfectly predict the future, and no one can, because the future is often many 15% die rolls. And imagine predicting the 20th century before the death of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. It's important to know if the Germans win the war. And the thing is, the Germans could have won World War I. And so that's an important die roll. And so this is a point I always want to be humble about, that I don't know, and I'm trying my best. And any person who can perfectly predict the future or claims that is a charlatan. And so I'm just trying to keep it real here. And the problem here is that we are before the death of the Archduke. And that a couple massive events will occur over the next year, of which I do not know. And we have to see what those are before I can make the next prediction. And fundamentally now, I'm just chilling on my porch, waiting to see these events happen so that I can then predict what happens afterwards. And The final fundamental variable I want to talk about is food insecurity. And this is something Peter Zeihan's covered very intelligently, that over 1 billion people are completely dependent upon food that is very unstable. And this is a problem with the entire modern world that we didn't really think about, that global supply chains are incredibly interconnected, and that's based upon fundamental instability. And what this causes is, for example, Russia or Ukraine, very unstable countries, they fall out, the Middle East and Africa starves. What occurs then is that, for example, all of our chips are from Taiwan. Taiwan, for chips for our computers and phones and stuff, Taiwan could easily get knocked out of the global system. The Congo produces all of the subcomponents for that chip. The Congo, again, a remarkably stable place. And so the entire world system is interconnected, and you should read Peter Zeihan, he covered this really well, in ways that are difficult for us to understand, meaning you pull out one pillar, the other pillars fall out. And this is a problem we have to deal with. And the problem here, and why I think this will last 60 years to deal with, is that we have issues that the ruling class will not discuss, that we cannot talk about. They're going to catch society at night and slit its throat when it can't see. Aging is one. No one outside of a handful of circles talks about aging as if it's a real thing. No one talks about these supply chain issues. We're fed bread in circuses, and we eat because we don't know what else to do and we're bored. And the problem is that we need to intelligently figure out what these problems are, what they're going to do, and then what to do about it. The problem is that no one in our current ruling class is willing to do that, and so we will be in a world of hurt until we can solve these issues. And I'll use aging as an example, where we need to fix the birth rate. We're not willing to do that. And what will eventually happen over the course of the next 60 years is that the birth rate will self-regulate, because those who have children will have more children, who will in turn have more children, and those who do not have children die out. That will take decades to work through, in the same manner that these famines and supply chain issues will work through. And my long-term thing is a lot is going to happen, and this is very complicated in many interconnecting factors, but I wish us all the best, and I'm glad that we live in interesting times, although they may be difficult, because I can't make this stuff up.
Fabulous above, as usual. It's funny because you usually produce these offline, and it's not clear that it's not as obvious that you're just as good or better live, which is fascinating. So everybody thought that was pretty amazing?
Questions?
Yeah. So no, I want to ask.
Yeah.
So I want to push back on your statement about predictions.
Yeah.
As that so you do the same thing that we're all supposed to do, and very few of us do, which is you predict a field of opportunities. So it's not true that there isn't a categorical direction that you can't predict.
Yeah.
Right? It's the sequence of.
Oh, that's correct.
Right. So can you address that, please?
Yeah. So before the French Revolution, you could very easily predict, if you were a sentient person, that France would have a social problem. The exact form it would take, and that it would eventually result in Napoleon, would be very difficult, because the rise of Napoleon is dependent upon a litany of other factors that you cannot predict. And so the thing is, as Curt said, there's a field of opportunities, a handful will occur, and the problem is, it's impossible to predict which of those field of opportunities occur, and then in what order.
So the point is that it's, you've worked on this, I've worked on these guys that are better than us at modeling have worked on it. And it's like, I came up with the same answer they did. You look at it and like, yeah, it sounds right. So the problem, we actually can see this is happening.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One of the things I find that's interesting is there are many different models that predicted the 2020s will have a major social crisis. One of them is Goldstein, which we talked about before. Goldstein in the 70s predicted that America and China would have a war in the 2020s. There's the Strauss-Howe model that in the 90s, from generational cycles, predicted America would have a crisis in the scale of the American Revolution, Civil War, and World War II in the 2020s. Peter Churchill predicted America would have a crisis in the 2020s. There's like 2 or 3 others where there are 4 different. David Hackett Fisher, again, predicted America would have a crisis on that scale in the 21st century. And so all of these people are to look at the patterns and see this, but they themselves, they couldn't have predicted the rise of the iPhone, or they couldn't have predicted Trump, they couldn't have predicted cancel culture, where there's the underlying form that we know may happen, but the actual particularity through which it manifests is very difficult.
So there's a storm coming, but I don't know if it's going to sink your ship.
Exactly. I hope to God not.
So I just wanted to make sure we didn't, because you're right, but there's this tendency to say, you guys can't predict. I don't know, I predicted a lot of stuff and I've been pretty accurate except for China. I'm like,
Yeah.
still don't know why they're still standing, right? So
Same.
I just want to enforce that. And part of the reason is because, I know your work and you're pretty right a lot.
Thank you.
I view our work as preventing that civil war.
I think we're past that point.
You think so?
I mean, like, bro, this will happen in like a year.
What?
Fast.
Well, right. All right. So if we can't prevent it, can we provide a recipe for what to do if it happens?
Yes, we can. I think it's important that people, just talk about this, try to figure it out. Because there's a litany. Imagine it's Russia in 1910. And you could have, out of the mess of the fall of the Tsarist government, you could put the Tsars back in power. You could have fascists. You could have nationalists. You could have Slavic militarists, Democrats, I guess, minor socialists. Literally anyone would be better than the Bolsheviks. If us today can sit down in America and prevent Stalin from rising to power, my life will be worth living.
In other words, no matter how we narrow the outcome from the extreme, it's an improvement.
Yes. The prevention of absolute horror, I think, is a worthwhile endeavor.
Does that mean then that an optimistic outcome might be, say, a Thermidor outcome?
I mean, I try to be as optimistic as possible, but I guess it doesn't come through my work. An optimistic outcome is we continue to be a democracy. We continue to be a wealthy, free society. I hope we don't have a committee that cuts up which people to kill. I hope there aren't mass committees determining who dies. And I think that if we try to be conscious about these things and know that that is an option, I hope that we can avoid it.
Thank you. Well, so I just wanted to, do you think that while they're in denial of having these discussions out in the open, that they're secretly aware? Because one of the things that you could argue was like the whole deal with COVID.
Yeah.
Just before COVID broke out in China, there was a bunch of huge revolts going on in Hong Kong, almost like they released the pandemic in an attempt to delay the inevitable.
What I see here is that the elite and every faction has some understanding of the underlying factors going on. I don't think they have a fully correct one, and of course, we believe our model to be correct, as do all people. But
Except we're right, aren't we?
I mean, we are on the right, so but I mean, for the World Economic Forum types as an example, they know that society is unstable. I don't think they have any comprehension of how poorly off the average person is, and they view it as a climate change issue. It's something you see people externalize these underlying socioeconomic, social issues to climate change or to racism, where I think if you're a normal leftist person, you see your society fall apart, you say, that's racism. And the thing is that they don't build a causal line, it just feels right. And for the Communist Party, I think they know they're unstable. I do not think they're using our worldview to reach the conclusions. And thus the conclusions they reach from that will not be ours and will not, I don't think they'll be good because they understand things are bad. I think they're using a different justification. They might be saying Western capitalism made the people weak, so they were unable to accept true communism. Which I mean is true, and we do all agree with that. Capitalism does make people weak. Stalinism is the only way.
What should we do to be safe, or to potentially?
What should I do, or what should the government do? What should you do?
You know, us here.
Okay.
People in this audience.
I have a video about this. You should check out my video. Get food, get friends, get guns. That is all of life.
I see your presentation. What I hear is, no matter how bad it gets, it'll start going back the other way in 60 years. And
I don't think, not even 60 years. Things will be better in 5 to 10 years, but then there will be, what happened in all these previous crises, as an example, is that the reason these crises lasted decades is that none of them were the severity of the world wars. So for 4 years, World War I, 4 years, killed European civilization. Europe took 1,000 years of development to get its young men to die in the trenches, to burn it all in 4 years. And so you look at the Black Death, for example. Black Death ravaged Europe. It was really horrible for a few years. That raised wages. And then there was a period of stability that lasted decades. And then there was a second part of the 100 Years' War. And so there will be good, like, our lives will not be unilaterally terrible, I believe. Where there will be troughs, there will be periods of stability. And one of the things Barbara Tuchman talks about is that my speciality is the Middle Ages. And if you read a history of the Middle Ages, it appears Vikings attacking this town, Vikings attacking this town, Magyars attacking this town, Arabs attacking this town. And it appears that France is constantly under attack until you realize this is a 60-year period. That's between us and World War II. And so imagine hearing 10 attacks on America, imagine hearing 20 terrorist attacks in America over a 60-year period. That's this entire lifetime. So that wouldn't affect your daily life.
So we could be Vikings.
I mean, that sounds pretty
I was
based.
promised Luke.
I mean, you got to do what you got to do. If society's falling apart, be a Viking. I support you in your journey.
Well, so one more thing. So another
Yeah.
concept. What do you think of the possibility of Caesarism?
Oh, I think that's going to happen. Yeah, I think that's pretty plausible.
Do you think it'll prevent war or create temporary stability for a little while?
I think all of that, yeah. I think it'll probably do. The thing with Caesarism is that the Caesar is often short-term brilliant, where the men who create Caesarism are often great chads, and they bring stability and order to a society in the manner of Napoleon. However, in the long term, it is often at the cost of social stability and order. Where Augustus rose, then his sons were the next people after him were Tiberius and Caligula. Napoleon was a great man. The leaders after Napoleon were not. And Caesars often are driven by a sense of ego, where they push the society for their own personal ego, which is glorious in the history books, but difficult to live through.
We have the same problem in businesses. And one thing you learn is if you build a company that's highly dependent upon you, it's going to die after you.
Yeah, my YouTube channel's screwed then. I just got to not die.
I didn't actually make that association. That was great.
My death?
No, Jesus. This is what our conversations are like. We say stuff and it feeds me. All right.
Question?
Yeah.
I think I saw, like on a video years ago, that there were certain periods in history when states tend to be weaker and get smaller. Like I think after the Roman Empire,
Yeah.
states got generally smaller in size, and they maybe played out that trend for a couple hundred years, or maybe 1,000 years or so. And now we're in a period, I remember, where states are getting more powerful. Do you see any signs from any of the historical research or any of the books you've read that suggest that we're in a period now where states are going to wane?
Yeah, I think states are going to go in decline in power, which is something I've seen recently, where in every single conflict in an imperial empire and a marginal state, the marginal state's done better than expected. Vietnam is a great example. Afghanistan is another example. Hamas doing so well against the Israelis is another example. Imagine if the American military had to fight a guerrilla campaign in Appalachia. They'd lose. And so we have seen a move away from centralized states to more decentralized. And I believe that, I guess that'll occur over the next couple of centuries, although I don't know.
Who wrote that book? Jewish military historian. Martin Van Krevel. Martin Van Krevel. He says he's got a book there. His book is about states are going to fall apart for the same reason.
Text the link to me, please.
Do you think the United States, if it encounters this, will become like another version of the Holy Roman Empire when it fractured?
It's possible. I don't know what the future is going to hold. I think the U.S. is one of the countries that's best likely to hold though. We're pretty ethnically unified, culturally unified, have a single geographic territory, we're wealthy, we're self-sufficient. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I could see the U.S. I see the U.S. decentralizing before it actively splits apart, like giving regional states more power. Yeah, same.
That's sort of, nice. Actually, that's what the founding fathers originally wanted. Actually.
Yeah.
Prevent tension.
A lot of beards at this conference.
This is kind of well-worn ground about the comparison of having a localized society and rhyming with the Bronze Age collapse.
Yeah.
If we can expect that because of the precariousness of all these different variables across the globe, and if conflict arises that kind of throws fuel on the fire, how would we be able to, at least in the U.S., hedge our bets for a rebound? Obviously, we are, as you said, we have a lot of resources here
Yeah.
that can be independent. What moves can we make to kind of accelerate the
Yeah.
rebuilding
I,
process to be independent of that?
I get this question a lot, and it boils down to two things. Increase wages and get rid of the left. I think those are the two things that would, if you put them, would...
That'll
No, it's really that. No, we keep saying that it's not that complicated, guys. If you understand the first principles that's causing it, that's all it's really going to take.
Because, I mean, the thing is, if you increase wages, it lowers political strife, it lowers stress, lowers all the problems I discuss here. And the left has become this force that constrains creativity through holding all the positions of society through ideological dogma. And so if you remove this centralizing dogmatic power, it opens up a tremendous amount of creativity across the entire society. Because we don't know what to replace the left with. And through that process, it means people have to figure the answer out. And then through that, we'll get a lot of other cool stuff.
I have another question.
Sure.
How do you think the fertility issue is going to rebound, resolve itself out?
I mean,
Let's just say
that-
each generation gets smaller and smaller.
So,
Kids aren't going to have any kids.
There is balance in all things. The people who have kids will have kids, and because they're the kind of people who have kids, they will continue to have kids. The people who will not have kids will not have kids. It's like you naturally select for pronatal norms through who passes on to the next generation.
I got 3 sons. My son talks about having 10 kids all the time. I'll be able to gift him a reasonable house by the time he's ready to get married. I started with nothing. It's those who have kids not only have kids, they think about how their kids can have even more kids.
It's the circle of life, and it moves us all.
Well, the only issue then is the demographic pyramid as we move through the crisis period, right?
Yeah, the crisis period will be hard. But the thing is, the natural world always has equilibriums. And so we will reach stasis, and then we'll have too many kids, and then we'll hit the problems again, and then it'll continue. And that makes it sound depressing and sad. But at the same time, all of human history is contained within that, and all the beautiful things, their Hagia Sophia, the pyramids, Mozart, are all contained through these historical cycles of pain.